Imagine standing on the edge of a still, moonlit lake. The air is unnaturally silent, the sky cloudless. Suddenly, without warning, the water begins to ripple, though no wind touches your skin. A shape emerges just beneath the surface. Not a boat, not a creature. Something smooth, perfectly round. What is that? You don't have clue. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. May you receive great rewards for subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing the story. Now, let's continue with the story. The year was 2008. Texas had barely recovered from the media frenzy of the Stephenville Lights when a quieter, more insidious mystery began to ripple through the communities around Lake Whitney. Unlike Stephenville, this story didn't break headlines. It crept in like mist on the water, subtle, strange, and unforgettable. It began with whispers. Fishermen trading stories under their breath at bait shops. Locals noticing something off in the air. There were lights, cold and colorless, skimming the surface of the lake at night, appearing just before disappearing in absolute silence. Most dismissed them as illusions, reflections, tricks of tired minds. But the unease grew. And then came Charlie Reed. Charlie wasn't just any observer. He was a pilot, one of the most respected small craft aviators in Central Texas. On the night of February 3rd, he flew a standard route, cruising above the quiet expanse of Lake Whitney. His dashboard instruments had always been dependable until that night. First, the altimeter blinked wildly, showing him 30 feet above water when he was nearly 200. Then, the compass spun without logic, like a broken toy. The static on the radio turned into something else, a low, harmonic hum that made his skin crawl. He tried to signal the control tower, but his voice was met with nothing but that endless drone. And then, through the canopy of his cockpit, he saw it. Hovering just above the lake's surface was a shape, matte black, elliptical, with a faint glow rippling from beneath it. It didn't cast a shadow. It didn't make a sound. It simply was. And as he blinked, it was gone. In less than a second, it had shot into the sky and vanished. No contrail, no sound barrier, nothing but empty air and a thundering silence. Charlie made it back to land shaken and pale. His flight logs were marked incomplete. His plane, though intact, had odd scorch patterns along the undercarriage, patterns that didn't match engine heat or electrical fault. But he wasn't alone. That same night, several lake residents reported ground tremors that rattled loose plates from kitchen cabinets. One woman living along the southern shore claimed her clock stopped at 2:13 a.m., the exact moment radar stations briefly lost contact with Charlie's aircraft. The next day, a local environmental team, led by Dr. Evelyn Barron, arrived to conduct routine water testing. What they found, however, was far from routine. Sensor equipment malfunctioned in specific areas along the lake. Readings showed brief but violent fluctuations in electromagnetic fields. The lake's pH had shifted slightly, only for a few hours, before returning to normal as if nothing had occurred. Even more disturbing, dozens of fish were found dead near a quiet inlet, their bodies untouched by predators, but their organs showing microscopic ruptures, as though exposed to sudden pressure changes. The military, when contacted, denied any exercises in the area. Official statements blamed natural disturbances, but none of the scientists could find a natural source that fit the data. Locals knew better. They had seen the lights, felt the hum, watched the sky swallow something it couldn't explain. Charlie Reed never flew over Lake Whitney again. And that was only the beginning. Dr. Evelyn Barron hadn't planned to stay in Whitney. The environmental study she was assigned to was meant to last 3 days, routine water sampling, data collection, and analysis. But after what happened on the night of February 3rd, something in her refused to leave. She arrived at the lake the morning after Charlie Reed's encounter. The air was crisp, the sky overcast, and the lake disturbingly calm. Her sensors, placed in different quadrants of the water, were immediately affected. Power surges, irregular frequencies, data spikes that made no sense. She recalibrated everything twice, suspecting interference from nearby radio towers, but there were none. And the anomalies weren't constant. They pulsed, like a signal being sent from somewhere deep beneath the surface. Her team dismissed the findings as instrument malfunction. Evelyn didn't. That afternoon, while reviewing sonar readings in her mobile lab, something caught her attention. A depression in the lake bed. Not natural. Perfectly round, almost geometric. A formation approximately 27 meters across, with smooth edges that resembled the hull of something metallic embedded beneath layers of silt. She sent a drone down to record footage. The drone never returned. The next morning, she found her vehicle's GPS frozen and her laptop wiped. Not stolen, just blank, as if it had never been used. She hadn't shared her findings yet. Only she knew what she had seen. And now, someone or something wanted that information gone. But Evelyn was not easily frightened. She returned to the lake alone that evening, hoping to catch something, anything, that might explain the underwater depression. Armed with only a waterproof field recorder, she rode to the coordinates where her drone had vanished. The water was glassy, silent. At 2:17 a.m., her recorder captured a sudden drop in surrounding temperature by nearly 10 degrees. The water beneath her began to swirl slowly, rhythmically, as if stirred by invisible hands. And then came the sound, low, almost subsonic. A pulse. One beat, then another. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive. She leaned over the edge of the boat, and for the briefest moment, she saw it. A faint shimmer just beneath the water. Oval, reflective, and looking back at her. She screamed, pulling away instinctively. But the lake returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened. The pulses stopped. The cold faded. She rode back in silence, heart pounding in her ears. The moment she stepped on shore, her recorder clicked off. When she checked the data later, most of the audio had been replaced by static, except for a single, clear pattern. A hum, 3 seconds apart, 5 tones, repeating. That tone would later be found embedded in sonar files taken by civilian divers. It would appear again in a shortwave radio signal near the lake, and once more in the cell tower logs from a town 15 miles north, each occurrence exactly synchronized to 2:17 a.m. Something was transmitting. Evelyn stayed in town longer than she had intended. She tried to publish her findings, but journals refused to print them. Her name slowly became attached to conspiracy threads and fringe science blogs. Funding dried up. Her lab was closed. But she never stopped listening. She moved to a small house overlooking the lake. Every night at 2:17, she waited, recorder in hand, watching the surface, watching for the shimmer, for the hum, because Evelyn Barron was certain of one thing. The lake was not just reflecting the sky. It was echoing something deeper, something trying to reach out, or trying to rise. Before the lights, before the hum, before the headlines that never made it past county lines, there was Dale Mercer, the quiet owner of a rundown marina on the northern edge of Lake Whitney. Dale wasn't the kind of man people noticed. Grizzled, weather-worn, with a voice like gravel soaked in whiskey, he'd lived on the lake his entire life. Ran his bait shop, fixed up boats, and never asked questions. But what he saw on the night of February 3rd changed him. He hadn't spoken about it until weeks later, and even then, only after 3 beers and a long silence. That night, Dale had stayed late, replacing a faulty fuel line on an old pontoon boat. The air had an odd static charge to it, like the moments before a storm, though the sky was empty. Around 2 a.m., the lake suddenly lit up, not brightly, not like lightning, but with a dull, pulsing blue glow that seemed to rise from the water itself. Then the animals began to react. Birds scattered from trees without a sound. The neighborhood dogs howled and then fell silent. And Dale? He froze, wrench in hand, staring out across the water. What he saw, he said, should not have been real. A shadow, massive, moving just beneath the surface, rippling out in silence. Not a boat, not an animal. It stretched too far, moved too smoothly. Then, without warning, a column of mist rose from the center of the lake. Not steam, not smoke, A fine, glowing mist, pale blue, almost silver, spiraling upward as if pulled by something high above. And in the middle of that mist, suspended for a few impossible seconds, was the shape. Black, oval, angular edges that shimmered in and out of visibility like a heat mirage. Then, with a jolt that shook the dock beneath his feet, it vanished upward into the stars. Dale didn't sleep that night. He sat in his shop, shotgun in hand, staring at the lake through a cracked window. In the days that followed, he noticed things. The water pumps at the marina began to fail without reason. Fish stopped coming to the shallows. Customers, mostly locals, began to speak in hushed tones. One man said his outboard motor died in the middle of the lake and wouldn't start again until he drifted back to shore. Another said his GPS glitched, spinning him in circles even though the sky was clear and his path was straight. And then there was the stranger, a man in a dark suit, no ID, no badge, showed up 2 weeks later. He didn't ask about the lights. He asked about Evelyn Barron, asked whether Dale had seen her near the lake at night. He asked calm, polite questions, but something in his eyes made Dale's skin crawl. The man left with no warning, no goodbye. Dale never saw him again, but the questions lingered. Why ask about Evelyn? Why did the mist come before the lights? Why had his dock begun creaking at night when the wind was still? One night, Dale decided to take a rowboat out to the center of the lake. No electronics, just an oil lamp and a notebook. He wanted to see if the stories were in his head or under the water. He returned 2 hours later, his lamp unlit, his face pale, his notebook soaked and torn. He never spoke of what happened on the lake that night, but the next morning his marina was closed. Permanently. A handwritten sign now hangs in the boarded-up window of his shop. It reads, "Do not go out past midnight. Do not look into the mist. The lake remembers everything." In a dusty attic above the old Whitney Gazette building, amid reels of microfilm and broken filing cabinets, a film canister sat untouched for over a decade. It was labeled only with the date, February 4th, 2008, the morning after everything began. No one remembered who left it there. It wasn't logged. It wasn't archived. It shouldn't have existed. Alex Ramirez, a freelance journalist working on a retrospective piece about the Stephenville Lights, stumbled upon it by accident while researching unrelated weather anomalies. At first, he ignored it, but the label called to him, February 4th, the same date Evelyn Barron had disappeared from public view, the same week Charlie Reed vanished from aviation records, the same period Dale Mercer shut down the marina and burned his notebooks in silence. Curiosity won. Alex brought the reel home and loaded it into his old projector, dust floating in the beam of light like suspended ash. What played was grainy, black and white, shot from a static security camera pointed at the lake from a ranger's outpost. The first minute was still. Then, without warning, the water on screen began to shimmer, not ripple, but shimmer, as if heat was rising from its surface. A thick mist bled in from the edges of the frame, curling like smoke across the water. The camera shook for several seconds, though no wind was visible. And then, from the center of the lake, something began to rise. It was not solid, not entirely. A shape, almost fluid in motion, as if woven from glass and shadow, lifted silently from the water. Lights, 3 faint pulses, flashed underneath it, not outward, but downward, toward the lake, as though scanning or communicating with something below. And then it turned. The object shifted, tilted, and seemed to look at the camera. The footage trembled, crackled, then went to static. When the video returned 10 seconds later, the lake was empty again. Still. And in the lower corner of the frame, a timestamp had changed. By 7 minutes. Alex blinked, rewound the tape, and played it again. The same result. A 7-minute gap of lost time. But he hadn't noticed it until he watched closely. The reel was continuous. The film itself hadn't been cut. The camera had recorded uninterrupted. And yet, the clock had moved. He uploaded the footage to his drive and tried to enhance the frames. Each attempt failed. The resolution degraded the moment he exported. Every screenshot turned into digital noise. Every copy corrupted within hours. So he printed one still frame, a single image, grainy and faint. The shape was barely visible, a blur against the horizon. But what chilled him most wasn't the object. It was the figure standing at the edge of the frame. Human. Alone. Watching the lake. Alex hadn't noticed it before. No record of who it was. No logs from the ranger station that night. The identity of the cameraman, if there even was one, remained unknown. Driven by instinct and unease, Alex contacted local police, environmental authorities, even Evelyn Barron's old lab, now shuttered and overgrown. No one responded. Or worse, they responded, then went silent. 3 nights later, someone knocked on Alex's door. He lived alone. It was nearly 3 a.m. Through the peephole, he saw a man in a suit. Clean, expressionless. No badge. No introduction. The man didn't speak. Just stared for a full minute. Then walked away. When Alex returned to his laptop, the footage was gone. The drive was clean. Factory reset. Not even boot data remained. The print he had made was still there, but something had changed. The figure at the edge of the lake was gone. Only the lake remained. Still. Silent. Watching. It began with a hum. Not a loud one. Barely audible. But persistent, always at the edge of hearing. It was first noticed by Elijah Grant, a retired telecommunications technician living 2 miles northeast of Lake Whitney. Elijah wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He didn't believe in aliens or ghosts. But he did believe in frequencies. He'd spent 35 years working for the state utility company, tracking underground cable faults and atmospheric noise. His ears were trained, his instincts sharp. And on February 12th, 9 days after the first sightings, Elijah began picking up something he couldn't explain. It came through his old wideband receiver, a relic he kept in his garage for nostalgia. A pulse. Faint. Repeating every 3.7 seconds. Not a radio station. Not atmospheric chatter. Just 5 notes. Then silence. Then 5 notes again. He checked every known frequency database. Nothing matched. It didn't follow any pattern used in aviation, military comms, or ham radio. The spacing was too precise, the waveform too smooth. It was artificial, but it wasn't human. Out of habit, he recorded it and ran it through a spectrogram. The visual signature startled him. The waveform showed a fractal pattern, recursive, self-repeating, like a digital fingerprint burned into analog noise. He had never seen anything like it. The signal only came at night, from exactly 2:17 a.m. to 2:23 a.m., and only when the receiver was pointed southwest, directly toward Lake Whitney. Curious and a little unsettled, Elijah drove down to the lake the following evening. He brought a portable receiver and a frequency isolator. At precisely 2:17, the static gave way to clarity. 5 notes again and again. He set up his equipment to triangulate the signal source. But the math didn't add up. The signal wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from beneath the water. That's when the lake changed. The surface began to vibrate, not ripple, but vibrate, as if it were a thin membrane being played like a drum. Elijah felt it in his bones, in his teeth. The receiver spiked violently, overloaded, then shorted out completely. His ears rang for hours. He fled, but not before one last thing. As he turned to go, he saw lights under the water. Not beams, not reflections. Symbols. 3 shapes, rotating slowly in the depths. Circular patterns, etched in light. They flickered, then faded. He returned home, shaken. He wrote everything down, drew the symbols from memory, scanned the spectrum logs, and tried to contact a university lab he once worked with. But no one believed him. The emails he sent bounced. The calls were never returned. He tried to upload the data to a cloud server. His internet died. Permanently. The next morning, a power surge fried his receiver. His backup drives were dead. Elijah never went back to the lake. But he didn't stop listening. Using an analog oscillator, he rebuilt a crude version of the pattern from memory. He ran it on loop in his garage for days. And on the fourth night, something answered. A second tone. Slower. Deeper. One he hadn't recorded, hadn't transmitted. It replied at 2:17 a.m. Then again at 2:23. 5 tones. 5 minutes. Always the same. He hasn't told anyone since. But the notebook he keeps near his bed has one line, underlined over and over. We are not alone. They are already speaking. The Lake Whitney Wildlife Enforcement Division maintained a small ranger station near the southern inlet, manned by rotating teams of local officers. They patrolled the waters, prevented illegal fishing, and responded to boating accidents. It was routine work, quiet, uneventful, until February 18th. At 1:45 a.m., Unit 9, a patrol boat with 2 rangers aboard, reported strange movement near the center of the lake. Officer Nolan Price and his partner, Jamie Lowe, had radioed in a disturbance. Lights flickering under the surface, no boat nearby, no sound in the air. Price's voice, typically calm and dry, sounded tight, strained. This isn't a boat, he said. Then a pause. Jamie thinks it's alive. That was the last transmission anyone heard from Unit 9. By dawn, the patrol boat hadn't returned. A rescue operation was launched immediately. By midday, a search grid was established. Helicopters flew overhead. Sonar sweeps began. But the water gave nothing back. Not a single piece of wreckage. Not a ripple. Not a shred of clothing or debris. That evening, the base station received a ping from Unit 9's onboard GPS. It had activated for precisely 6 seconds before shutting off again. The coordinates were traced, directly above the same submerged depression Dr. Evelyn Barron had documented days earlier. The same one her drone vanished into. When divers were sent in, their audio feeds crackled and failed within 40 meters of the lake bed. One diver, Shane Holbrook, resurfaced early, disoriented and panicked. He claimed something was moving beneath the mud. When pressed, he couldn't explain further, only that he felt pressure in his skull like a migraine but with no pain, just sound. The next day, Shane resigned from the team without notice. The remaining divers refused to go back down. Weeks passed. The case was officially closed as a probable drowning. No evidence of foul play, no bodies recovered, and no functioning equipment left behind to argue otherwise. The Rangers' families were given statements to read to the press, bland condolences masking a deep unease no one dared voice publicly. But the incident rattled the community. Rumors spread. Fishermen began to avoid the lake entirely. The docks emptied. And then came the photographs. 3 days after Unit 9 vanished, a man hiking along the ridge to the east snapped several pictures at sunrise. In the fog above the water, he captured something faint. A shape. Not a boat. Not a shadow. Something symmetrical. Tall. Angular. Floating upright just above the surface, motionless. In the third frame, it was gone. The man who took the pictures, Travis Mendez, posted them online. They stayed up for less than 12 hours. His account was suspended, and when he tried to repost them, he claimed his internet access was cut entirely. He left town that week, told friends he was being followed. The Rangers never returned. Unit 9 was never found. But late at night, if you stand at the southern inlet and listen, really listen, you'll hear it. The hum. Faint. Like something powered on, deep below. A vibration too low to hear, but strong enough to feel. And in the stillness of that sound, you might think you hear voices. Not words. Not language. Just presence. Something beneath the lake. Waiting. Still. But never gone. Her name was Maya Lane, 17 years old. Lived with her grandmother just a few hundred meters from the lake's northern edge. A quiet girl, withdrawn, more likely to be seen sketching in her notebook than speaking in class. She wasn't popular. She wasn't troubled. She was simply different. And after the night of February 25th, she was never the same. That night, according to her grandmother, Maya walked out of the house barefoot just before 2 a.m., her eyes wide open but empty, as if in a trance. The front door was left ajar, the carpet wet with lake water. though it hadn't rained in days. She was found at dawn, sitting silently on the sand with her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her hair soaked, her skin ice cold. She said nothing, just stared out at the lake with an expression no one could understand, equal parts terror and wonder. Paramedics examined her. She was healthy. No signs of injury or hypothermia. But she wouldn't speak until she began to draw. Her grandmother handed the sketchbook to a local deputy. The pages were filled with images, hundreds of them. Complex geometric patterns, interlocking circles, symbols that glowed faintly under blacklight, drawn in some kind of ink they couldn't identify. Amid the patterns were glimpses of something more. Figures, tall, thin shapes, standing in the mist, with elongated heads and limbs that bent the wrong way. Some were hovering, some emerging from water. One stood with its hand pressed against a mirror-like surface, its face a blur of spirals. Maya said she saw them. She said they spoke without speaking, filled her mind with visions, sounds, a pressure behind her eyes. Not pain, not words, just knowing, as if something had downloaded itself into her. They came through the quiet, she finally whispered. They are underneath the water. They are not made for light. She drew a final picture before the sketching stopped altogether. It was different. A landscape of sorts, fractured land floating above a dark void. In the center, Lake Whitney. Beneath it, an enormous black sphere, surrounded by smaller ones, like moons in orbit. A date was written beneath the drawing, March 14th. No one knew what it meant, but Maya grew more distant in the days that followed. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She spent nights sitting on the porch, facing the lake, sketchbook in her lap, but the pages remained blank. On March 14th, at exactly 2:17 a.m., she vanished. Her bed was empty, the front door unlocked. No sign of struggle, just her sketchbook left open on the porch, pages fluttering in the wind. The only thing written inside was a single phrase, scrawled in shaky handwriting across a blank page. It's opening. The next morning, the lake's water level dropped by nearly 8 inches in less than an hour. No rainfall, no seismic activity, no dam release, and no explanation. Authorities searched. Boats combed the shoreline. Divers returned briefly, but came back empty. Maya Lane was never found, but her drawings were preserved. Copies of them began to surface in online forums. Some were deleted within hours, others corrupted beyond recognition, but one remained intact. It showed a girl standing on the lake's edge, her reflection not mirroring her, but showing something else entirely. A shape behind her, rising, watching. March 14th. The date scrawled in Maya Lane's final drawing. By the time the sun set that day, tension had wrapped itself around the town of Whitney like a tightening wire. The lake was unusually still, glass-like, with not even the softest ripple disturbing its surface. Birds stayed out of sight. Dogs refused to go near the shore. Even the wind seemed to avoid the water. At 10:41 p.m., the sky changed. Without warning, every television set in town, on or off, flashed to static. Old CRTs, flat screens, even broken sets sparked to life. Radios crackled. Landline phones rang once, then went dead. And then came the hum. Not just the low pulse from before, but a layered, vibrating tone that seemed to echo inside the bones of anyone who heard it. People stepped outside their homes, confused, some clutching their ears, others dropping to their knees, overcome by vertigo. At 11:09 p.m., power failed across 4 square miles surrounding Lake Whitney. Emergency generators kicked in, but only partially. Lights flickered, glowed dim orange, then died altogether. And at 2:17 a.m., the sky opened. Witnesses described it as a rip, a jagged, horizontal tear in the darkness above the lake. Not lightning, not clouds, a split. Through it came light, pale, undulating, alive. The lake responded. The water lifted, not into waves, but into columns, long, shimmering streams that floated upward, as if pulled by invisible threads. Then the shapes emerged.
Dozens of them, silent,
Seamless, hovering just above the surface in perfect formation. No propulsion, no exhaust, just motionless black silhouettes outlined by the strange light from above. A group of campers on the western ridge captured 15 seconds of footage on a smartphone. In it, the light flickers, then stabilizes. A shape passes in front of the camera, round, organic, and massive, before the feed distorts and ends. The phone shut off on its own. It never powered on again. From across town, several residents reported seeing reflections of these objects in puddles and windows, but not in the sky. They looked up and saw nothing. But the water showed everything. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the tear closed. The lake settled, the hum vanished, and the power returned. But something had changed. Dozens of clocks, digital and analog alike, reset themselves. Not to midnight, not to 3 a.m., but to 2:17. Police reported 4 cases of unexplained catatonia. People found standing outside their homes, eyes open, completely unresponsive. They returned to normal within hours, but remembered nothing. All 4 had traces of mild electrical burns on their temples. And then, on the morning of March 15th, reports began to surface of people missing. Not just Maya, others. Quiet, unnoticed disappearances from surrounding towns. No signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. Only one common detail. Each missing person lived in a home with a direct line of sight to Lake Whitney. Authorities said it was coincidence. A power surge. Electrical interference. But among the locals, a new word began to circulate. Awakening. No one knew who said it first. But once it was spoken, it stuck. Like a splinter in the collective mind of the town. Whatever had opened that night wasn't just a breach in the sky. It was an invitation. A signal. And now it had been answered. It started 1 week after the sky tore open. Maya Lane's grandmother was the first to speak up. On the morning of March 21st, she walked into the local sheriff's office, carrying her granddaughter's sketchbook. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was a whisper. She came back, she said, but something's wrong. Deputies arrived at the Lane residence minutes later. Maya was sitting in the living room, dry-eyed, staring at nothing. Her posture was stiff, hands folded in her lap, like a doll propped on a shelf. She didn't flinch when they entered, didn't blink. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn the night she disappeared. There was no sign she had been outside. No dirt. No scratches. No weight loss. Her vitals were perfect. And yet, when they asked her where she'd been, she responded with one phrase. I was under. That was all she said. No more answers. No more emotion. Just silence. And she wasn't the only one. Within the next 3 days, 4 more of the recently missing reappeared, each one silently returning to their homes in the dead of night. A teacher, a mechanic, 2 teenagers from a town 12 miles north. All 5 were in the exact same condition, calm, unresponsive, medically sound, but distant, as if only a part of them had returned. Tests were inconclusive. Their memories were blank, not blocked, not suppressed, erased. Clean slates with familiar faces. And each of them, when asked anything about the lake, about the lights, about the hum, gave the same reply. I was under. Their sleep patterns were unnatural. Brainwave readings showed activity during rest that resembled waking focus. Deep theta patterns overlaid with sharp, rhythmic spikes. One doctor said it looked more like input than rest, as if they were still receiving something. And then came the dreams. Maya was the first to sketch them, despite not speaking a word since her return. One morning, her grandmother found the kitchen table covered in drawings. Hundreds of pages laid out like puzzle pieces. A dark world beneath a pale sea. Towering spires. Floating platforms. Symbols that moved when stared at too long. And always, the same central figure. A sphere. Massive. Black. Cracked like stone but bleeding light from within. It appeared in every drawing, surrounded by smaller orbs orbiting it like satellites. Each page was marked with a number, a sequence, coordinates. Others began to dream, too. Locals who had never disappeared. Farmers, teachers, night shift workers, all describing the same impossible landscape. A city beneath water, a sky with no stars, a pressure behind the eyes, and music. Terrible, beautiful music. One man, a former Navy sonar operator, described it best. "It's not a dream," he said. "It's a transmission." The sheriff's office tried to intervene, to calm panic, to suppress discussion. But rumors spread faster than any warning. People began leaving town, locking their doors, avoiding the lake. Then, on the morning of March 25th, the water level rose again, over 13 inches, without rainfall, runoff, or release. And along the north shore, something was found embedded in the sand. A piece of metal, smooth, dark, and impossibly dense. Not rusted, not corroded.
Clean.
Carved into it, in markings no one could decipher, were 5 repeating symbols. They matched the tones Elijah Grant had recorded weeks before. The metal was sent to a lab in Austin. It never arrived. The courier's vehicle disappeared en route. No crash, no call, just a van gone without a trace. The symbols, however, were copied, and soon they began appearing elsewhere, etched into rocks along the shore, scratched into playground slides, burned faintly into the underside of leaves. Whatever brought the missing back didn't come alone. They were messengers, echoes of something ancient, and something still awakening beneath the lake. April 1st, a day built for disbelief. At 4:12 a.m., every seismic sensor within a 100-mile radius of Lake Whitney recorded a vibration.
Shallow.
Localized, lasting exactly 5 seconds. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't thunder. It was labeled by emergency services as a non-seismic subterranean impulse. The term meant nothing, just a placeholder for something unknown. But the town felt it. Those still living near the lake were jolted awake by the sensation of the ground breathing, rising and falling beneath them like the slow exhale of some enormous creature. Windows flexed but didn't break. Lights flickered once. Then silence. Then came the power outage. Not just in Whitney, but in every surrounding town, county, and cell tower hub connected to the lake's power grid. And during that blackout for exactly 5 minutes, something else emerged, a low-frequency pulse that didn't come from machines. Phones that were off-powered themselves on. Radios that weren't plugged in emitted static. Even old walkie-talkies began to crackle with strange interference, tones that rose and fell like sonar pings from the deep. Elijah Grant, already tuned in for weeks, recorded the pulse. It wasn't random. It was mathematical. Each tone followed a precise logarithmic sequence, increasing in volume and resonance over time.
He plotted them.
The waveforms mirrored the curves of ancient spiral diagrams, golden ratios, Fibonacci arcs, shapes found in nature, in galaxies, in neural pathways. But what shook him most wasn't the math. It was what came after. At exactly 4:17 a.m., a single, clear voice broke through the interference. Not male, not female, not human, just one word, whispered, but undeniable. Begin. And then silence. No one could replicate it. The file corrupted within minutes of playback. The waveform flattened as if erased in real time. By noon that day, wildlife around Lake Whitney began behaving erratically. Birds flew in slow circles, sometimes striking trees as if blinded. Fish surfaced with no visible trauma, then sank again moments later. Deer were seen standing in the shallows, staring at the water for hours without moving. Even insects vanished. Then came the incident at the observatory. Just outside the town, a private astronomer named Helen Moray had pointed her telescope at the lake out of idle curiosity. The lens wasn't meant for that range, but at 4:17 a.m., it had captured something. A reflection. Not in the sky, in the water. For a fraction of a second, her lens recorded a perfectly symmetrical structure beneath the surface, Large, geometric, impossible to mistake for rock or current. It wasn't moving. It was waiting. And as she watched, a secondary ripple broke the surface. Thin, transparent, almost invisible. But behind it, something else. A second structure. Moving. Expanding.
Alive.
Helen fainted. Her telescope's hard drive was wiped clean by the time she regained consciousness. She couldn't remember collapsing. Only the feeling of something reaching out from behind her own thoughts. The following day, lakefront residents reported cracks forming in their basements, walls vibrating at night, and faucets that hummed quietly when left running. Not leaking, humming. The same five-tone sequence. Water wasn't just being affected anymore. It was becoming a medium, a voice. And Lake Whitney was no longer just a location. It was a conduit, a gateway, a threshold. And it had just been opened. April 5th. A group of amateur drone operators from Fort Worth arrived in Whitney, hoping to catch viral footage of the so-called UFO lake. They weren't investigators. They were thrill seekers, teenagers mostly, armed with cheap quadcopters and night vision filters. They launched from the western ridge just after sunset. The sky was overcast. The lake below, silent. Within 2 minutes, 3 of the 5 drones went offline. Total signal loss. The remaining 2 stayed up long enough to transmit something back. Not much. Just 34 seconds of footage. But what it showed froze every operator in place. The drone had hovered approximately 80 feet above the lake, capturing wide shots of the still surface. But then ripples. Not concentric waves, but a pattern. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Moving outward in a perfect spiral from a fixed point near the lake center. Then came the distortion. Not visual. Auditory. Each drone's onboard microphone began to register whispers.
Soft.
Dissonant. Unintelligible. But human in cadence. The voices didn't come from the air, nor from the device. They came from beneath the water, rising in volume and complexity, overlapping in layers, speaking in no language and every language at once. One of the teens, Marcus Yates, put on headphones to monitor the live feed. He screamed, dropped to his knees. His nose began to bleed. When asked what he heard, he repeated the same sentence for hours. It's not a sound, it's a memory. That night, something changed. The lake no longer waited for darkness. People began reporting auditory hallucinations during the day, echoes of voices that matched those they hadn't heard in years. A mother claimed to hear her deceased daughter humming. A pastor heard confessions he never received. A man heard himself, whispering things he'd never spoken aloud. Each experience occurred within 500 meters of the shoreline. By noon the following day, the effect had a name: the Whisper Field. Elijah Grant returned to the edge of the lake with a directional mic. What he recorded couldn't be explained by science. Not because of its complexity, but because it knew him. The recording, once isolated and cleaned, revealed a voice. His own. But from 16 years ago, reciting an entry from a journal he lost in a house fire. A journal that had never been digitized. A journal that had never been read by anyone else. The Whisper Field wasn't broadcasting. It was reaching in, pulling. And every time someone listened, it pulled deeper. Some residents began to hear the voices even in their homes. Always between 2:17 and 2:23 a.m. radios clicked on by themselves. Old cassette tapes played conversations that had never been recorded. A woman found her answering machine filled with messages from her childhood friend, who died in 1998. The lake was no longer passive. It had begun to probe.
Map.
Record. Memory. Emotion.
Identity.
People began to forget things. Not huge gaps. Just fragments. A lost birthday. A familiar face with no name. A house you remember differently than it is now. Subtle. Surgical. And at the center of it all, the same coordinates. The same shape. The same pulsing hum. Evelyn Barron, still watching from her cabin, sent one final recording to a private research group before destroying her equipment entirely. Her last words: "It's not a machine. It's a mind. The Army Corps of Engineers quietly arrived at Lake Whitney just after midnight. No press, no public notice. 5 unmarked trucks, 2 black helicopters that didn't appear on local radar. They set up a temporary perimeter and dropped sonar buoys into the water, more advanced than anything the locals had ever seen. Officially, they were responding to anomalous subsurface readings. Unofficially, they were trying to confirm what no one wanted to admit, that there was something living beneath the reservoir. The operation lasted less than 3 hours. By dawn, they were gone. But 2 local fishermen, camping half a mile south of the activity, saw something they weren't supposed to. One of them, Luis Carter, described it in a shaky phone interview later that day. They didn't just drop sensors. They pulled something out. A metal frame, bent like it had been crushed. Wires or tentacles, I don't know what I saw, but it was dripping. Not water. Something darker, like oil and mercury. Luis said the soldiers who handled the object didn't wear hazmat suits. They wore something else. Seamless, jointless, like armor that moved without creases. His friend, Eric, who took a picture, never made it home. His car was found wrecked against a tree with no signs of injury. His phone?
Gone.
No prints. No data. But Luis remembered the device. It wasn't broken. It was growing. That same night, 3 seismic nodes around Lake Whitney recorded a new pattern. A repeating vibration that pulsed in triads, spaced exactly 17 seconds apart. It wasn't random. It wasn't echo.
It was a heartbeat.
Evelyn Barron, still watching from her window, wrote only one word in her journal before tearing the page out and burning it. Awake. Then the dreams changed. Those affected by the whisper field began reporting shared imagery, hallucinations seen across multiple people on the same night, even those miles apart. A submerged hallway of bone and glass. Creatures watching from behind translucent walls. And most disturbingly, an opening. A gateway. Circular. Massive. At the bottom of the lake. Each dream ended the same way. The voice returned. 5 tones. 1 phrase. You were not first. Fear began to turn to obsession. A cult-like group emerged from nearby towns, calling themselves the Hollow Wake. They believed the lake was sacred. Not haunted. Not cursed. But inhabited by a consciousness far older than Earth. Something that didn't arrive, but had always been here. Buried beneath sediment, dammed by human hands. And now, the dam was weakening. They gathered at night, lit fires along the shoreline, chanted in tones that mimicked the lake's frequency. Local law enforcement tried to stop them. Each time, equipment failed. Radios cut off. Patrol cars died. One deputy's body cam recorded 30 seconds of footage before cutting to black. In that footage, members of the Hollow Wake stood at the water's edge, chanting in rhythmic tones. The lake pulsed with light, soft, blue, alive. Then the surface parted. Not crashed. Not splashed. Parted like a wound slowly opening. And for a brief moment, something looked out. The deputy screamed. The footage ended. He hasn't spoken since. Now, the lake is no longer feared. It is worshipped, avoided, obeyed. The federal presence has returned, this time with fencing, barriers, and threats of arrest. But locals know the truth. The water level continues to rise and fall without cause. The hum never stops. And the whispers now speak in names, real names, of people who haven't been born yet. Something is pushing through the membrane. Something with memory. Something with purpose. And it no longer hides beneath the surface. It is reaching up. April 13th. For the first time in recorded history, the deepest section of Lake Whitney, charted at 234 feet, registered as bottomless. The sonar buoys deployed by a private environmental group returned garbled signals. The pings they sent down never came back. At first, they thought it was a malfunction. But when divers were sent to check the equipment, they found it intact, floating, unanchored, suspended above a void that hadn't existed on any previous scan. The depression in the lake bed had widened. What was once a geometric anomaly had become an impossible absence, a perfectly symmetrical, slowly expanding cavity with no end, no current, and no explanation. The divers refused to go deeper. One described the feeling as falling, even while holding still. Another said he could hear his name being whispered through his oxygen tank. When he surfaced, he bled from the nose and ears. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. That same evening, Evelyn Barron vanished from her cabin. The door was left open. A tape recorder sat on her desk, still running. The recording began with static. Then her voice, hushed and calm. "It's opening, and I don't think it wants to stop." At exactly 2:17 a.m., her tape captured a low droning hum, familiar but deeper. Then another sound, a heavy, groaning shift, like a pressure release from something ancient and vast. Then silence. Evelyn's boots were found on the dock, her glasses folded neatly beside them. The lake had taken her, and it wasn't finished. In the following hours, strange phenomena erupted across the region. Cattle miles from the lake began walking in perfect circles, always clockwise, never breaking stride. Birds flew in spirals so tight they collided midair and fell dead by the dozens. Rivers feeding into the lake reversed flow for 6 full minutes. And then the sky began to dim, not with nightfall, but with something unnatural, like a veil slowly being drawn between the sun and the earth. A subtle grayness settled over the water. Light became heavy. Time itself seemed to slow. Locals reported missing time. Watches desynchronized. Entire neighborhoods lost track of hours. And in the middle of it all, the lake's surface remained perfectly flat. A mirror. And in that mirror, people saw things. A fisherman reported seeing an exact replica of his own boat drifting upside down beneath his reflection. A teenager saw his face in the water twist and age before his eyes. A mother saw her unborn child staring back from the surface, mouth moving silently beneath the ripple. All visions vanished the moment they were touched, but the feeling remained. Lake Whitney was no longer just a body of water. It was a memory vault, a mirror, a mind, and now it had awakened. That night, emergency sirens in 5 counties blared without cause. Not from software, not a test. They were manually triggered, yet no one had touched them. At 3:03 a.m., satellites passing over the region captured a sudden, massive distortion in the air above the lake, a temperature shift, circular and expanding, like heat rippling through space. Infrared showed a shape, massive, circular, faintly glowing beneath the water. Then came the anomaly. The lake no longer reflected the sky. For a full 8 minutes, it reflected something else entirely. A different horizon, a twin sun, towering shapes in the distance, architecture no one on Earth could have built, spires like bone, bridges made of light, and above them, a sky filled not with stars, but with eyes. Not literal, not physical, but knowing, aware, watching. The reflection vanished just before dawn, but in every puddle, every window pane, every polished surface near the lake, the afterimage remained. April 14th. The town of Whitney woke to silence. Not the kind of quiet that settles at dawn, but a complete, unnatural absence of sound. No birds, no insects. Even the wind refused to stir. Radios hissed with static. Phones displayed no service. Watches stopped. Time itself, it seemed, had taken a breath. Then, the lake began to rise. It didn't surge or flood. It simply lifted, as if something vast below had shifted upward, displacing the weight of the world above it. The shoreline receded by several feet. Trees bowed toward the water. Entire docks creaked and cracked from the strain. And then light, not from the sky.
From beneath.
Pale blue, the same as the mist seen weeks before, poured upward in faint pulses, like a heartbeat rendered in luminescence. The lake glowed, and in the center, the void opened fully. A perfectly round portal, spanning nearly 40 meters, expanded on the surface. No waves, no ripple, just a dark eye staring back at the world. And from within it they came. Shapes, humanoid but wrong in every detail. Tall, impossibly thin. Limbs elongated, folding with precision. Faces without features. Bodies that shimmered with density, yet cast no reflection. They did not walk. They slid, as though space bent around them. At first, there were only 3, then 5, then dozens, emerging in total silence. And behind them, rising halfway from the void, the sphere, a massive, pulsating structure of obsidian and glass, rotating with a rhythm that felt biological. It floated, then paused, aligning itself with the sky. Not the stars, but something else. Witnesses collapsed. Some vomited. Some screamed. Some stared, paralyzed by awe or terror. One man dropped to his knees and began laughing, tears streaming down his face. He said only one thing before he passed out. "They've been waiting for us to catch up." Government vehicles swarmed the perimeter, but none dared approach the water. Communications failed the moment they came within visual range. Cameras refused to record. Guns jammed. Helicopters circled, then veered off without explanation. And still the figures kept coming. But they didn't attack. They didn't speak. They only moved to the shore and stood, waiting, observing. And as the sun began to rise behind the gray veil above the lake, the first of the humans crossed. A woman stepped forward, silent, drawn, not pulled, not forced. Willing. She walked across the surface of the water without sinking. Her body glowed faintly. Her eyes were closed. She disappeared beneath the sphere's shadow and was gone. Then another. A boy no older than 10, hand held by no one, walking toward the lake with a peaceful smile. By sunrise, 23 people had crossed. None returned. They left behind shoes, clothes, memories. But no bodies. No footprints. And no grief. Because those who stayed behind began to feel something else. An awakening. Not physical. Mental.
Deep.
Molecular. Dreams flooded the minds of those closest to the lake. Visions of other places, other stars, other lifetimes. Memories that weren't their own. Faces of people they'd never met, places they'd never been. And in those dreams, a message. You are not the first world. You will not be the last. The crossing is not the end. It is the recognition. No one knew what that meant, but they felt it, in their blood, in their breath, in the way their bones suddenly seemed to remember something buried beyond generations. The lake was no longer a place. It was a doorway, a bridge between realities, between species, between states of being. And it was open. Only one question remained. Who would be next to step through? April 15th, the final day. By noon, half of Whitney had emptied. Not from panic, but from release. Those who remained gathered silently along the shore, eyes fixed on the water. There were no sirens, no soldiers, no cameras, no screams, only stillness. And then, without warning, the sky cracked open once more. A seam of light, subtle, golden, alive, split the air above the lake, aligning perfectly with the sphere now fully emerged. It hung motionless just above the surface, massive beyond comprehension. Its exterior no longer shimmered. It pulsed, slow, measured, like a breath held for centuries and finally exhaled. The figures were there, too. Hundreds of them now, standing in precise lines across the water and the land. They faced the humans not with menace, but with a kind of solemn recognition, as if greeting distant cousins. And then came the final signal, a sound that was not sound, a wave that moved through the mind instead of the air. 5 tones. But now they were not foreign. They were familiar. A greeting, a call, and an invitation. The remaining residents felt it in their bones. In the silence that followed, people began to move, not rushed, not chaotic, but with quiet certainty. Whole families stepped into the lake. A man walked forward, his cane left behind in the sand. A teenage girl closed her eyes, took off her shoes, and smiled as the water met her. They did not sink. They were received. Dozens crossed. Then hundreds. And the lake responded. The shoreline pulsed outward like a ripple in reverse. The trees leaned away. The birds returned, circling once, then vanishing into the sky. Above, the split in the clouds widened, revealing a sky that wasn't Earth's. A sky of soft auroras, suspended architecture, and movement. Things beyond shape, beyond scale. Then the sphere began to ascend, slow, like a mountain lifting free from gravity's grasp. Beneath it, the void closed. The water filled in behind it without a splash, without a sound. And as the last figure passed over the surface, the reflection returned. Lake Whitney became a mirror once more.
Still, silent, whole.
No wreckage, no debris, no Evelyn, no Maya, no whisper field, only water. By sunset, the town was hollow. Homes abandoned, vehicles left with doors open.
Meals half-eaten.
Not like an evacuation, more like a collective answer to something that could no longer be denied. And then, as the light faded, one final phenomenon. The lake vanished. Not all at once. Not like a drained reservoir. It folded inward, its surface compressing into a single point at the center, drawn down like silk into a thread, until it was gone. In its place, a depression.
Dry, smooth,
and cold. At the bottom, etched in black stone, was one sentence. Memory completes the return. Weeks passed, then months. Authorities walled off the site. No trespassing, no access, no answers. But the whispers continued. In dreams, in signals, in reflections. Not everyone was taken. Some had been left behind, to witness, to remember. And every year on April 15th, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the silence returns. The air changes, the sky flickers, and somewhere, deep below where the water once rested, something still listens and waits.